This is not going to be an easy show to explain or describe, but you know what? I wouldn't have it any other frelling way. Hey there, folks. I gotta gush a little bit about Farscape. Now, this isn't really topical, at least not in the grand scheme of things. It's somewhat topical to me because this month will mark the end of the podcast project I've been doing for almost 2 years now with Jesse Gender called What the Frell, which is on the Council of Geeks podcast feed. There's a link for that down in the description if you never noticed it before. And that was where we watched every episode of Farscape and did a podcast review and discussion of it. For me, it was a rewatch because I fell in love with the show in the early 2000s. For Jessie, it was her very first time watching it. Having now finished it up, for me, for the second time, I just need to gush a bit about this show and maybe even bring some attention to it for those who have never heard of it. So, Farscape was the brainchild of one Rockne S. O'Bannon, who had done some work on the revived version of The Twilight Zone and also had been the mind behind the Alien Nation film and then subsequent TV series, which is okay. It's interesting. It's not amazing. Farscape was his idea, and it is just set in a galaxy far, far away. Not a long, long time ago, though. So that's the legal distinction. Legally distinct. The best kind of distinct. No, seriously, though, it's not really any resemblance to Star Wars. It is very much its own thing. And one has to wonder if part of the initial reason for it being created was just to give the Henson Creature Shop something to make other than fantasy stuff and Muppets. It features all kinds of bizarre aliens, from elaborate makeups to insane puppetry. You can forget about the standard Star Trek model of put a couple bumps on the forehead and like maybe a ridge in the nose. That's an alien. Oh no. Oh no, 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 no. That will not do for Farscape. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk premise. Premise is actually pretty basic. It deals with an astronaut by the name of John Crichton, played by Ben Browder. And he, while running an experiment in his module in Earth orbit, ends up getting caught in a wormhole and shot across the galaxy to a place that he does not know and does not know him. The first thing that he encounters is a ship called Moya, which is a living ship. Get used to sentences like that. They happen a lot. Now, it's not like it's a giant being that the crew travels inside of its guts. It's a biomechanical ship, but Moya is alive and has her own thoughts and instincts and agenda every now and then. And he gets pulled on board Moya, gets injected with some translator microbes so he can actually understand what's being said to him, and encounters folks like Dargo, this massive hulking brute with tendrils on his face who seems very angry all the time, and a woman who is all blue, and a tiny little frog-looking guy. And that's before he even gets to meet the ship's pilot, who is literally physically integrated into the ship, though also a separate entity from Moya, but is the crew's means of communicating with Moya because they can't communicate with her directly. They have to do it through Pilot, who also has his own thoughts and his own needs and his own agenda. Added to the mix, Aaron Sun, played by Claudia Black. And I'm not going to say that Aaron is my favorite character of Farscape. I am going to say, though, that I think Claudia Black might be the MVP of the show. She packs so much into this character right from the beginning, and to watch the journey that she goes on over the course of this show, it's gold. The work she puts in is amazing. That's not to undersell anybody else. All the acting's great. But Erin is a Sebacean who looks human but is not. They're actually a bit more reptilian. She's literally cold-blooded. But she is a member of the Peacekeepers, local peacekeeping force that is, let's go with a little bit iron-fisted And she, after angering her superior officer, Captain Crace, also finds herself now stuck on Moya. So we have a ship with its own thoughts and its own mind, piloted by a being with its own thoughts and its own mind that can suggest and make recommendations to the ship, but does not actually, strictly speaking, directly control the entire thing. And then we have a crew made up of people who are all on the run. This is a crew of escaped prisoners plus one space boy.
Hi.
There's your starting setup. They don't know where they're going. They just know nobody wants them. And they are stuck in an area called the Uncharted Territories. Now, there's certainly stuff there. There's civilizations, there's trading routes, whatever, but it's just not a well-known region of space. And it's where they have to be to avoid being picked up by the Peacekeepers. And that's just your starting premise. There's additional characters who get added to the show over time or who gain additional depth. There's Chiana, who just, her movement, her very way of getting around is weird and off-putting and alien. There's Jewel, who I didn't love initially, but she did grow on me. Sokozu, a little bit more mysterious. Even Naranti, who bugged the heck out of me when she first got introduced. By the time the show was done, I kind of liked her. There's Stark, who's a little bit of an intermittent character. He shows up from time to time. They could overdo his manic tendencies, but for the most part, he was a pretty compelling character. But then, villains. Let's talk villains. So there is Crace, who is our starter villain, who has a vendetta against John because when John first showed up in this sector of space, a fighter from the Peacekeepers clipped his module and then crashed and exploded. And that was piloted by Crace's brother. And Crace has a serious grudge. And Crace just starts out as a guy out for revenge. And he gains a lot of depth as time goes on. Has a really interesting arc. But then there's the real villain of the show, who gets introduced towards the end of the first season. My friends, Scorpius. Such a great villain. His look, his manner, he is intimidating, he is in control, he is patient. But he is also not above moments of anger. If he thinks he's going to eventually get what he wants, he can be very, very patient, frighteningly so. But if things start to go off in a direction he does not feel he can control, he can get angry, and that's its own kind of scary.
I cannot risk killing the knowledge that he possesses, and he knows that.
And he is methodical and pragmatic, but also invested. He can be cold and calculating, but he has personal investment in what's going on. He is kind of everything. And a character who is like everything, especially as a villain, should not work, but wow, does he ever. He is so good as the primary villain of the overall show. The aliens, the creatures, the settings, the stories all have a little twist with them. One of the things that I really treasure about Farscape is the fact that it will, on more than a few occasions, do what is ultimately a pretty stock space adventure episode. You know, the kind of baseline premise that you probably would have seen in something like any number of Star Trek shows, or Lost in Space, or The Expanse, or Stargate, or what have you. But they tend to put a little twist on it, a little something to just shake it up. I'll give an example from an episode that I actually don't even think is very good, but is very illustrative of what I'm talking about. In the episode Jeremiah Crichton finds himself briefly stranded on a planet, and when the other members of the crew eventually come down to get him, the locals begin to praise Rigel, who is the little frog-looking dude, as a god. Now, the visitor from space being viewed as a god is a stock story. And generally, the way that works is that it becomes a story about the misapplication of faith or the misunderstanding of a more quote-unquote primitive society, and it does that kind of thing. It can often come across as a bit patronizing, and it's usually not very good. And here it's not great, but they do a little twist on it, which is he kind of is their god. Or rather, the Hynerians, which is his race, and the Dominars, which he's a deposed leader, did send out a whole bunch of basically starter kit colonies. There is a statue of a Hynerian there, and his family lineage would have sent them out, and then over time, because Hynerians are very long-lived, and the Hynerian Empire has been around for a very long time, but just through the sheer passage of time and being cut off from direct communication with the rest of the Empire, the mandate of we are doing this for our Dominar becomes we are doing this for our God, becomes a religious doctrine, and now their God walks among them. Again, not a massive departure, but they won't just do the tropes straight. They'll do the tropes. They'll have fun with the tropes. But they're not just going to do them without a little bit of Farscape flavor in them. But I think if I were to really get into things, it's going to start getting something a bit more spoilery. And honestly, if you haven't seen the show and you like sci-fi adventure and you like things a little weird, I do recommend this show quite a bit. Here's what I'm going to do before I go any further. I'm going to recommend a test episode. I'm going to recommend to you an episode that I think is a good metric for viewers who have not seen Farscape before to take a look at. And if this is your jam, start the show from the beginning. So the episode I'm going to recommend is from season 2. It's episode 4. It's called Crackers Don't Matter. And I'm not going to tell you too much about what's going on with it. I think you can just watch and it speaks for itself. But that will give you a taste of the kinds of weirdness that you're in for. And you can decide if that is your jam. And it's also pretty standalone. And it's the kind of base, very self-contained plot that, as long as you know the basic setup of there's a human in space with a ton of aliens, that's really all you need to know. You can just watch the episode as a self-contained thing. You'll get what's going on, and you'll decide if the vibe is yours. So, having now made that recommendation, I need to start talking about some of the specifics that are a little bit more spoilery, which does ultimately also include me talking about my favorite character, who I also think it just exemplifies why I will always keep coming back to the show. Let's talk about Harvey. If you are continuing on because you've decided you didn't want to check out the show first, or you've decided you don't care about spoilers, for context, Harvey exists only in John's head. He's kind of Scorpius, but he's also not. He's what's called a neural clone. He is something that Scorpius implanted in John's head with the goal of extracting information out of John that Scorpius was unable to attain through his normal interrogation and torture techniques. So Harvey is a copy of Scorpius who's in John's head, but because he's in John's head, he has access to John's cultural references, his sense of humor, and over time, Harvey becomes this amalgamation of Scorpius and John. He is very much his own thing. He will drop pop culture references. He will manipulate scenes of him talking with John inside John's head into being police interrogations, or the two of them riding a roller coaster, or them at a construction site, or Harvey will be in a pink bunny suit. Harvey is the embodiment of the fact that for a good chunk of this show, Crichton is literally losing his mind. And Harvey is there to egg him along the whole way. Harvey is the kind of character that I can look to and go, I can't get that anywhere else. A lot of the other characters or a lot of the other aspects, I could get something like that somewhere. Dargo is very Klingon-esque, as much as I love him to death. So, I could find a Dargo-style character. Zan is very chill and very zen. Plenty of characters like that out there. Erin is the tough, no-nonsense action woman. Those are a dime a dozen. A bunch of them played by Claudia Black, especially in video games. So, like, I can find equivalents to most of these things somewhere else. But not Harvey. Harvey is his own beast, and Harvey is judiciously used. He could have very easily been overdone, oversaturated, and just sucked the oxygen out of the room if he was used too much. But he is used in the perfect amounts. He's not there all the time, but when he's there, it's glorious, and it makes you excited for the next time he's going to show up. And then there's just all this little stuff. A lot of it just about the interactions and the way these characters relate to each other. Dargo and John build the most beautiful bro-style relationship after initially really not getting along, like to the point that they actually kind of agree, like, look, we just need to accept that we are never going to be friends. And at the time they say that, you kind of believe it. But you also then get to watch that grow. Even Rigel, who should be just a big pain in the ass, and he is that, but he's endearing and lovable and very well puppeted. And the creatures, the aliens, the weirdness of this show permeates everything. The concepts are weird. The characters are weird, whether they be one-off aliens who appear or core concepts like frickin' Harvey. It's weird. And I love something weird. Like, you know what? This is what I think I would pitch Farscape as. You know the Star Wars cantina scene in A New Hope? How it's just packed to the gills with weirdness, strangeness. Imagine a whole show where that vibe is just the entire thing. There's no normal. This is the normal. The weird is the normal. But it keeps shaking it up. And because we have John there to ground it, the normal never becomes too predictable because we have our grounded human element who is reacting to it the way that we are. It's such a fun show. And it ends really well after a, frankly, terrible cliffhanger at the end of the 4th season when it got canceled, and they knew they were canceled when they did that cliffhanger. They had no business pulling that. But the miniseries that finishes it off, Peacekeeper Wars, ends it really well. For something it starts strong too. Like the premiere episode is real good. Premieres are never this good. It's a really good premiere. It has its bumps along the way. There's a couple of duds, but even the duds are usually interesting. Are still, ooh, okay, like that didn't quite work, but that was kind of a cool idea. Or that was a neat touch, or that was a nifty alien. There's really nothing in this that is devoid of something, some entertainment, some value to take from it. And most of it is steeped in that. It is so good. It is so fun. It is frelling awesome. And I just had to gush. Have you watched it? I hope you will. And have you heard my podcast? I hope you do that as well. But in any case, what do you think about Farscape? Whatever you think, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, and subscribe. Patreon is what covers the bills, enables me to do this, the podcast, the whole deal. I couldn't do this without that help. But even if you can't do that, all the other stuff helps me out as well. Interacting with the video, sharing it around, that helps. But don't worry too much about it. Because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Just remember who your daddy is.
Dargo, tell him who his daddy is.
I'm your daddy.
It's the end credits. Means I gotta shout out some patrons. This month, it is Turok, Oliver B., Linda Walters, TT, Robin Powell, Frenobulax, The Poodle, Eidolon, Tracy Scrabbit, Dharma, Michael Doyle, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Angry Casperl, Adam Lefty Taylor, Robin Moore, Shayla Gourlay, and Bookworm. Thanks so much for your support.